Ambassador Kethvar had served the Galactic Council for 3 centuries. His silver-scaled skin bore the marks of countless diplomatic missions across 47 star systems. He had negotiated peace between warring gas giants, established trade routes through hostile nebulae, and convinced primitive civilizations to join the galactic community. Never once had he failed to complete his mission. But as his sleek vessel approached the 3rd planet of a small yellow star, something felt different. The briefing had been simple enough. A species called humans had recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Standard protocol required a formal assessment before offering them membership in the Council. Most new species fell into predictable categories: aggressive warriors, peaceful traders, or scientific researchers. The Council's vast database contained behavioral patterns for every known intelligent life form. Humans, however, defied classification. Kethvar reviewed the preliminary reports as Earth grew larger in his viewport. The blue-green world looked remarkably similar to his own homeworld of Zephyria. Oceans covered most of the surface, broken by 7 massive continents. Cities glowed like scattered jewels across the night side of the planet. The first anomaly appeared in their communication systems. Most species developed either quantum entanglement networks or traditional radio waves. Humans used both simultaneously, along with something called the Internet that seemed to connect every individual on the planet. Billions of conversations happened at once, creating a constant stream of information that flowed like a digital river around their world. Kethvar's translator struggled with human languages. They had developed over 6,000 distinct verbal communication systems, many still in active use. Most galactic species settled on 1 or 2 languages for efficiency. Humans seemed to delight in complexity. His ship received clearance to land at a facility called Kennedy Space Center, in a region they called Florida. As Kethvar descended through the atmosphere, he noticed something that made his scaled hands tremble slightly on the controls. Humans had covered their planet with lights, not just in cities, but everywhere. Thin lines of illumination connected settlements across vast distances. Bridges of light spanned enormous bodies of water. Even remote areas showed scattered points of brightness, as if these creatures had claimed every corner of their world and refused to let darkness exist anywhere. The landing platform was surrounded by hundreds of humans. They stood behind barriers, pointing devices at his ship and shouting in their various languages. Kethvar had encountered many first-contact situations, but never had an entire crowd gathered just to watch a diplomatic vessel arrive. Most species sent only their leaders and a few guards. As his ship's ramp lowered, Kethvar stepped onto Earth's soil for the first time. The gravity was slightly lighter than his homeworld, but the air was rich and clean. A delegation of humans approached, led by a female with short gray hair and kind eyes. "Welcome to Earth," she said, in perfectly pronounced Galactic Standard. "I'm Secretary General Martinez of the United Nations. We're honored by your visit." Kethvar blinked in surprise. Learning Galactic Standard typically took new species several years. Humans had accomplished it in months, apparently teaching it to their entire leadership council. "The honor is mine," Kethvar replied, offering the traditional council greeting gesture. "I am Ambassador Kethvar, representing the Galactic Council of Worlds." Secretary General Martinez smiled and attempted to copy his gesture, though her anatomy made it slightly awkward. Around them, the crowd of humans pressed closer, still pointing their recording devices and calling out questions. "Please forgive the excitement," Martinez said. "This is the first time we've had a visitor from space. Our media is very interested in documenting this moment." Media. Another human peculiarity. Most species had centralized information distribution. Humans had thousands of competing organizations, all trying to tell the same story from different angles. The tour began at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Kethvar had seen governing bodies before, but human politics baffled him. Instead of a single world leader, they had divided their planet into 195 separate nations, each with its own rules and customs. Yet somehow, they managed to cooperate on major issues. "How do you make decisions with so many different governments?" Kethvar asked, as they walked through the assembly hall. "Very slowly." Martinez laughed. "And very loudly. But we get there eventually." The next stop was a human hospital. Kethvar had expected to see basic medical facilities, perhaps some primitive healing techniques. Instead, he found himself in a gleaming complex where humans performed miracles. In one room, surgeons were replacing a damaged heart with an artificial one. In another, doctors were using targeted radiation to destroy cancer cells without harming healthy tissue. The pediatric ward made Kethvar pause at every window. Human young were born incredibly fragile compared to most galactic species. Yet these doctors had found ways to save infants that arrived too early. With incomplete development, we lose very few patients here, explained Dr. Chen, the chief of surgery. When someone is dying, we don't give up easily. That evening, Kethvar was taken to something humans called a concert. Thousands of people gathered in a massive structure to listen to organized sound patterns. The music itself was beautiful, but what struck the ambassador was the audience response. As the symphony played, humans in the crowd began to leak water from their eyes. At first, Kethvar thought they were ill, but their expressions showed joy, not pain. They were crying because the music moved them emotionally. The ambassador had attended cultural events on dozens of worlds. He had seen species that appreciated art, that found meaning in creative expression, but he had never witnessed beings so deeply affected by beauty that their bodies responded involuntarily. After the concert, Secretary General Martinez took him to a quiet cafe. Around them, humans sat in small groups, talking and laughing. Children played games, while their parents watched with obvious affection. "Ambassador," Martinez said, stirring her coffee, "I know you're here to evaluate us for council membership. I'm curious about your assessment so far." Kethvar considered his words carefully. "Your species is unique. I've observed behaviors that don't match any patterns in our database. Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet," Kethvar admitted. "Tomorrow, I'd like to visit some of your educational institutions, and perhaps see more of your planet's diversity." Martinez nodded. "Of course. Though I should warn you, we might surprise you even more." As Kethvar returned to his ship that night, he found himself thinking about the humans he'd met. Their planet was a contradiction. They had achieved remarkable technological advancement while maintaining incredible biological and cultural diversity. They fought constantly among themselves, yet cooperated on massive global projects. Most puzzling of all, they seemed to care deeply about individuals. The hospital didn't just treat patients, it treated each person as if their life had immeasurable value. The concert audience didn't just hear music, they felt it with their entire beings. Kethvar had always prided himself on his ability to categorize and understand new species quickly. After one day on Earth, he realized he might need to completely rethink his approach. As he prepared his preliminary report to the council, he struggled to find the right words. How could he explain a species that defied every logical pattern? How could he describe beings that seemed to operate on pure emotion, while simultaneously achieving scientific breakthroughs? For the first time in his long diplomatic career, Ambassador Kethvar wasn't sure what recommendation he would make. Outside his ship, the lights of human civilization continued to twinkle across the planet's surface, a testament to a species that refused to accept darkness, whether literal or metaphorical. The second day began with a visit to something humans called a school. Kethvar had seen educational facilities across the galaxy, usually sterile environments where young minds were filled with necessary knowledge as efficiently as possible. Most species focused on practical skills and obedience to authority. The elementary school in rural Montana was nothing like that. Children between the ages of 5 and 11 ran freely around a playground, their laughter echoing across the valley. Inside the building, small humans sat in circles while their teacher read from a picture book about friendship and courage. The walls were covered with colorful artwork that served no practical purpose beyond expressing creativity. "We don't just teach facts," explained Principal Williams, an elderly woman with paint stains on her clothes. "We teach children to think, to question, to imagine." In one classroom, Kethvar watched a girl with missing front teeth present a project about dolphins. She had built a model from recycled materials and spoke passionately about marine conservation. When she finished, Her classmates applauded enthusiastically, and the teacher praised her effort before gently correcting a few scientific misconceptions. On my world, Kethvar told the principal, young ones who make errors are disciplined to prevent future mistakes. Here, we believe mistakes are how we learn. Principal Williams replied. Fear of failure stops children from trying new things. The ambassador spent an hour observing a literature class where 10-year-olds discussed moral dilemmas in their reading. The teacher asked complex questions. Was the character right to lie to protect his friend? What would you have done? Why do people sometimes have to choose between two good things? Kethvar was astonished. These children weren't memorizing answers. They were developing their own ethical frameworks. Most galactic species simply adopted the moral codes of their leaders. Next came a university visit. At MIT, Kethvar met Dr. Sarah Kim, a young woman leading a research team developing quantum computers. Her laboratory buzzed with activity as graduate students from dozens of different countries worked together on complex equations. The interesting thing about quantum computing, Dr. Kim explained, is that we're not just building faster machines. We're creating systems that think in fundamentally different ways. How long have you studied this technology? Kethvar asked. Personally? About 6 years. But I'm building on work from thousands of researchers across centuries. Newton, Einstein, Planck, Schrödinger, Bell, Feynman. We call it standing on the shoulders of giants. This concept troubled Kethvar. Most galactic species hoarded knowledge, sharing only what benefited their own advancement. Humans seemed to build collective understanding across generations, freely sharing discoveries that others could improve upon. In the afternoon, Secretary General Martinez took him to visit a refugee camp in Jordan. Kethvar expected to see the typical aftermath of warfare, defeated populations being managed by their conquerors. Instead, he found something unprecedented. The camp housed families who had fled conflict in a neighboring region. But rather than simply containing them, the international community had created a small city. There were schools, medical facilities, workshops where people could learn new skills, and recreational areas where children played sports. These people aren't your own species, Kethvar observed, confused. Why do you invest resources in their welfare? A volunteer doctor named Hassan, himself a former refugee who had become a citizen, answered, because they're human beings. That's enough. Kethvar met a family from Syria. The father had been an engineer before the war forced them to flee. Now he taught mathematics to refugee children while learning new technical skills. His wife had started a small business making traditional crafts to sell in local markets. Their daughter, only 8 years old, spoke 3 languages fluently and dreamed of becoming a doctor. Do you plan to return to your homeland when the conflict ends? The ambassador asked. Perhaps, the father replied. But this place has given us hope again. These people welcomed us when we had nothing. That evening, Kethvar witnessed something that changed his understanding completely. A natural disaster had struck a coastal region of Japan. An earthquake had triggered a massive tsunami, devastating several cities. The ambassador watched the human response with growing amazement. Within hours, rescue teams from around the world were traveling to the disaster zone. Countries that had been in diplomatic disputes suspended their arguments to send aid. Ordinary citizens donated money, supplies, and volunteer time to help people they would never meet. But it was the local response that truly shocked him. Despite losing their own homes and possessions, survivors immediately began helping their neighbors. Elderly people shared their food with families who had children. Strangers worked together to search through rubble for survivors. No one waited for orders from authorities. They simply saw need and responded. Kethvar accompanied a rescue team as they worked through the night. He watched a group of construction workers risk their lives to save a cat trapped in a collapsed building. The animal had no economic value, yet these humans treated its life as precious. Why? Kethvar asked the team leader. You could be injured for an animal that serves no purpose. The man looked at him strangely. She serves the purpose of being alive. That little girl over there has lost everything. Her cat, might be all she has left. As dawn broke, Kethvar stood among the ruins and observed something remarkable. Despite the devastation, humans were singing. A group of elderly women had gathered the children and were teaching them traditional songs. Their voices rose above the sound of rescue equipment, carrying hope across the disaster zone. The ambassador's hands began to shake as he recorded his observations. In his 3 centuries of diplomatic service, he had never encountered anything like this. Most species responded to crisis with either panic or cold efficiency. Humans somehow managed to maintain both practical effectiveness and emotional compassion simultaneously. On the flight back to the United States, Secretary General Martinez shared more stories. She told him about Doctors Without Borders, who traveled to dangerous regions to treat patients regardless of politics. She described teachers who spent their own money on school supplies for poor children. She explained how humans had created organizations dedicated to preserving endangered species, protecting environments they would never see, and solving problems that wouldn't affect them personally. But why? Kethvar asked, genuinely perplexed. What do you gain from helping others? Martinez was quiet for a long moment. We gain everything. We gain the knowledge that we've made someone's life better. We gain the trust and friendship of people who might help us someday. But mostly, we gain the satisfaction of living up to our own values. Your values? That every life has worth. That suffering should be reduced when possible. That cooperation is better than competition. That the strong should protect the weak. Kethvar spent the evening reviewing video recordings from his visits. He watched human children learning to share toys. He watched doctors working 18-hour shifts during emergencies. He watched strangers helping each other during the disaster response. Most disturbing of all, he watched himself in those recordings. His own responses looked cold and calculating, compared to the warmth and spontaneity of human emotions. When the little girl had cried about her lost cat, Kethvar had felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. His preliminary report to the council grew longer and more complex. How could he explain a species that valued individuals over efficiency? How could he describe beings who made decisions based on emotions rather than pure logic? More importantly, how could he return to his own world knowing what he had learned about the possibilities of consciousness? The council's database contained detailed behavioral analyses of 10,847 different intelligent species. Every known pattern of civilization development was documented and categorized. Warlike species became galactic enforcers. Peaceful species became mediators. Scientific species became researchers. Trading species became economic coordinators. But humans didn't fit any category. They were all of these things simultaneously, depending on circumstances and individual choice. They had created a civilization based on controlled chaos, productive disagreement, and voluntary cooperation. As Kethvar prepared for his final day on Earth, he realized that his mission had fundamentally changed. He was no longer simply evaluating whether humans deserved council membership. He was questioning whether the council deserved human membership. Outside his ship, the lights of human civilization continued their eternal dance across the planet's surface. Each one representing lives lived with passionate intensity that the ambassador was only beginning to understand. Kethvar's final day on Earth began with what humans called a sunrise service at a small chapel in the mountains of Colorado. Secretary General Martinez had suggested it as an example of human spiritual practices, but the ambassador was unprepared for what he witnessed. People of different ages, backgrounds, and ethnicities gathered in a simple wooden building as dawnlight filtered through stained glass windows. They sang together, shared personal stories of struggle and hope, and participated in rituals that seemed to connect them to something larger than themselves. But it wasn't the religious ceremony that moved Kethvar. It was watching an elderly man help a young mother with her restless children. It was seeing teenagers voluntarily assist elderly members of the congregation. It was observing how people naturally cared for each other without being asked or ordered. "We have 17 different faiths represented in this congregation," explained Pastor Helen, a woman whose calm demeanor radiated genuine peace. "Different beliefs, same commitment to loving our neighbors." After the service, Kethvar joined a community breakfast where conversations flowed easily between generations. A retired professor discussed philosophy with a local farmer. Children listened to war veterans tell stories about faraway places. A young artist showed her paintings to anyone interested in looking. On my world, Kethvar told Pastor Helen, individuals of different ages and professions rarely interact socially. It's considered inefficient. Here, we've learned that diversity makes us stronger, she replied. Different perspectives help us solve problems in ways we never would have discovered alone. The morning's final stop was a place that would haunt Kethvar forever. A children's hospital in Denver. He had visited medical facilities before, but this was different. The walls were painted with bright murals of fantasy creatures and peaceful landscapes. Music played softly in the hallways. Volunteers dressed as clowns and storytellers moved from room to room, bringing laughter to young patients facing serious illnesses. In the oncology ward, Kethvar met 8-year-old Emma, who was battling leukemia. Despite her obvious frailty, she greeted him with enormous enthusiasm. "Are you really from space?" she asked, her eyes bright with curiosity rather than fear. "I am," Kethvar replied, kneeling to her eye level. "That's so cool. I want to be an astronaut when I grow up. I want to visit all the planets and meet aliens like you." Dr. Rodriguez, Emma's physician, explained that her prognosis was uncertain. The treatments were experimental, with no guarantee of success. Yet everyone in the hospital worked with the same intensity they would use for a patient with perfect recovery odds. "Every child deserves our best effort," Dr. Rodriguez said simply. "Hope is part of the treatment." Kethvar spent an hour with Emma, answering her questions about space travel and alien worlds. Her parents sat nearby, their faces showing both devastating worry and fierce determination. When it was time to leave, Emma hugged the ambassador with surprising strength. "Will you come back to visit?" she asked. "If I can," Kethvar promised, surprised by how much he meant it. That afternoon brought the most challenging experience yet. A visit to the International Space Station via shuttle flight. Kethvar had traveled between stars, but watching humans achieve orbital velocity with their primitive but ingenious technology filled him with unexpected admiration. Aboard the station, he met Commander Chen Wei, a Chinese astronaut, and Dr. James Okafor, a Nigerian astrophysicist. They worked alongside colleagues from Russia, India, and Brazil, conducting experiments that would benefit all of humanity. "We've been in space continuously for over 20 years, Commander Chen explained as they floated in the observation dome, Earth spinning majestically below them. Different countries, different politics on the ground. But up here, we're just human beings working together." Looking down at Earth from space, Kethvar finally understood what made humans unique. Most galactic species saw their homeworlds as resources to be managed. Humans saw theirs as a precious, irreplaceable home to be cherished. "It's beautiful, isn't it, Doctor?" Okafor said softly, following Kethvar's gaze to the blue marble below. "From up here, you can't see borders. You can't tell where one country ends and another begins. You just see one world, one people." The final evening was spent at a gathering Secretary General Martinez called a cultural celebration. Representatives from every nation on Earth had come together to share music, food, art, and stories from their homelands. Kethvar tasted foods that triggered taste receptors he didn't know he possessed. He listened to musical traditions that seemed to speak directly to his emotions. He watched dances that told stories of human triumph, struggle, love, and loss, spanning thousands of years. But what affected him most deeply was the children's choir that performed near the end of the evening. Young voices from every continent sang together in dozens of languages, creating harmonies that seemed to capture the very essence of what it meant to be human. As their voices rose in a song about hope and friendship, Kethvar felt something unprecedented happen to his physiology. Moisture began gathering in his eyes. His chest felt tight with an emotion he couldn't name. His hands trembled as he tried to process what he was experiencing. Secretary General Martinez noticed his distress. "Ambassador, are you all right?" Kethvar couldn't speak for several moments. When he finally found his voice, It came out rough and uncertain. I don't understand what's happening to me. You're crying, she said gently. It means you're moved by something beautiful. My species doesn't. We don't respond this way to stimuli. Perhaps you do, and you just haven't had the right stimuli before. That night, alone in his ship, Kethvar attempted to write his final report to the council. He stared at the blank screen for hours, unable to find words that could convey what he had experienced. How could he explain that humans treated their elderly with respect instead of simply ending their lives when productivity ceased? How could he describe a species that spent enormous resources keeping premature babies alive, that risked their lives to save animals, that created art with no practical purpose beyond beauty? How could he tell the council that humans had made him feel emotions he didn't know existed? The standard recommendation form included categories for military capability, technological advancement, resource potential, and strategic value. But humans transcended all categories. They were simultaneously advanced and primitive, logical and emotional, competitive and cooperative. Most troubling of all, they had shown him possibilities for existence that his own species had never explored. In 3 days, humans had taught him more about consciousness, compassion, and hope than he had learned in 3 centuries of galactic diplomacy. As dawn approached, Kethvar made his decision. He deleted the standard evaluation form and instead wrote a personal message to the council chairman. Honored Chairman, I cannot complete the requested assessment using our established protocols. This species defies all known patterns of civilized development. They operate on principles we have never encountered and demonstrate capabilities we do not possess. I request permission to extend my mission indefinitely for further study. There is much we can learn from them, if we have the wisdom to listen. I will file a complete report when I better understand what I have witnessed. In the meantime, I strongly recommend that we approach these humans not as potential subjects, but as potential teachers. As his message transmitted to the galactic network, Kethvar looked out at Earth one final time. The sun was rising over the Pacific Ocean, illuminating a world where beings lived with passionate intensity, loved beyond reason, and hoped, despite overwhelming odds. For the first time in his long diplomatic career, Ambassador Kethvar didn't want to leave. 3 weeks later, when he finally returned to the Galactic Council chambers on Centauri Prime, Kethvar walked to the speaker's podium with tears still fresh in his eyes. The assembled delegates waited for his standard report, but instead found themselves facing an ambassador fundamentally changed by his encounter with humanity. He spoke for 3 hours without interruption, his voice breaking with emotion as he described what he had learned. When he finished, the great chamber sat in absolute silence. Finally, Chairman Vextor asked the question that echoed in every delegate's mind. Ambassador, what do you recommend? Kethvar looked around the chamber at beings from 1,000 worlds, all waiting for his answer. When he spoke, his words would reshape galactic civilization. I recommend that we prepare ourselves for the greatest teachers we have ever encountered.